Hi, it's Paul Antonelli here, and in this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about it's all about really creating the framework or the vision for your personal why, which will then feed on to the business why, and how you go creating your ideal business. Now, I just want to precursor this with some information about some of my own previous business experience that really motivated me to look for a process that I could really implement to help me build a business that really worked for me, or my ideal business. We've been in business, as I've said in the previous episodes, I've been in business for almost 3 decades. I've been bankrupt before, and the whole idea of business was that you sort of, I mentioned the A plus B equals C concept, which I talked about in a previous episode, that really just doesn't apply. And when I got into one of my recent businesses, ResiCert, it's been around for over a decade, I really didn't want to just go down that path again. So I was really motivated to ensure that how this business evolved, how it grew, it really needed to work for myself, my wife, my family, and my personal life, as well as become a successful business. And so that was the driver, and that was a motivator for me to really take some time to be clear about the sort of business that I wanted to create. And I didn't want to end up, down the track with a business that may have been a successful business, but just didn't work for me. I didn't want that to be the case. And so in order to avoid that, I spent a bit of time creating what I called the ideal scene. What was it going to look like? What did it need to look like? I'm going to talk a little bit about that and then give you a bit of an example of how that looks and feels. So the whole purpose of going into a business is to move from your current scene to your ideal scene. So if you take everything away, you strip everything else away, the entire purpose of going into a business, starting a business, growing a business, is to move from a current scene, which is what exists today, to the ideal scene. There are only 2 scenes in this process, the current to the ideal. And so obviously it's just like going on a road trip, or if you're heading somewhere, if you're going to head somewhere, you need to know what the destination's all about. So in order to go through the process of creating your destination, your ideal scene, it has to be documented, it has to be mapped out. It's very important. If you don't end up doing this, you'll end up with a business that may or may not work for you, may be profitable, but you really don't want that to be the case. And if your business isn't working for you truly, if it's not your ideal business, then how do you go about framing up a process and framing it up so that you can convert it and transform it into your ideal business? So I'm talking about this concept now. It's called the scene, the ideal scene. So the ideal business starts off with the baseline of an ideal scene. And as I've talked about, one of the key drivers for being in business is so that it supports what you want to achieve personally, supports your personal goals, and how you want to live your life. It's very important to start at the personal level. And so what that means is you've got to create an ideal scene, a personal ideal scene. And I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like and how that comes together. And that's the start point. So step away from the business for now and focus primarily on building out your own personal ideal scene. I'm going to talk a bit about that. I'm going to give you some examples of what that looks like. Once you've sort of framed up what's called your personal ideal scene, then you're in a position to really build out what we call your business ideal scene, which sort of makes sense, doesn't it? So if you've got your personal ideal scene, you've mapped that out, because the only way you can really build a business that truly works for you is to make sure that that's defined. And I hope that makes sense, So let me say that again. If you want to build a business that truly works for you, you need to define what truly works for you is. And that's what this process of mapping out your ideal scene, your personal ideal scene, is all about. So before I get into the details, I'm going to give you some steps into how you go about creating an ideal scene. This will apply both to your personal and your business. And then I'll give you an example so that you can see how this applies. So there's three ways of looking at building out your ideal scene. And I'm going to start with the first thing, when you understand that the idea behind this process is to go from your current scene to your ideal scene, then that's the entire reason you go through this process, to go from your current to ideal scene. So the start point is your current scene. So what I would suggest you do is look at your current scene, everything about everything that exists in your current scene, your current world, what's around you, how you live, how you work, what you do. And if there's anything and there's aspects of it that you would consider ideal, then you want to retain them. You might sharpen them up, you might redefine them, but you want to retain them. You want to keep those things. And that's important, because if there's something that really is the components of the way that you live your life at the moment, and it could be you're getting to exercise, you've got a great relationship, you've got a great family life, whatever it is, you want to make sure you retain that, because part of the experience has been that you lose things that are ideal through not being conscious that you want to retain those. So step one of building out an ideal scene is to look at your current scene, think deeply and carefully about it, and make sure that anything that is ideal, that you would define as ideal, you retain. So that's step one. Step two of this process is looking then at your current scene for the other parts that aren't ideal. So what this means is, what's in your current scene that you would go, that's just not ideal. It's not really how you want it to be. And what would that need to look like for it to be ideal? And that could be removing it totally. Look, that's not really ideal. It's not really what I want to be doing, where I want to be, how I want to be living, what I want to spend my time on. I'll go through some examples of that. So if it's not ideal, then you've got to look at what it would look like to make it ideal. And that could involve removing it totally. It could involve adjusting it or changing it or reframing it. So I hope that makes sense. So then what we've done is step one, look at your current scene, retain and keep what is ideal. Step two is to look at your current scene and what isn't ideal and how would you make it ideal. How would you transform that? How would you make it look so that it is ideal for you? So they're the first two steps. The third part of the process, which is often the hardest part of this process, I've done this with many business owners and many people over the years, is to consider what's missing, okay? To consider what's missing. It's a lot easier for us to look at something and go, that's good or that's bad, it's ideal, it's not ideal. It's a lot more difficult for us to consider what's missing from our scene. What is something that doesn't exist at the moment and should exist if it was your ideal scene? And this is where often a big leap can take place or a transformation can take place. So for example, you may want kids, which you don't have. You may want children, and you don't have children at the moment. So that could be something. You might want to learn another language. You might want to develop some skills that you don't currently have. So it's really looking carefully at, what were your past, what were the past things that you wanted to achieve in life, your dreams, your goals. Where do they go? Why don't they exist in your current scene at the moment? So that involves a little bit of thinking about what's missing. And it is the most difficult thing to do, because, we can look at something, for example, You can look at a car, for example, and go, yeah, I like that, I don't like that. These are the things I like about this car. I don't really like the color. But then it's just the way our brain's wired. What's actually missing from this car? What is it about this car that's not ideal for me or that I don't like? And they're the things that often we miss, but they're the things that will probably and often do make the most amount of difference. When you go through this approach, and I'm going to give you an example of how this works, I've got some steps to doing this, and here's some rules that you might want to sort of note down. The first thing is use specific numbered points. So when you're creating an ideal scene, they're numbered points. It's not like paragraphs and paragraphs. It's numbered points. And the reason is that you want to be able to, you might have 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, I don't know, whatever number of points you might get to, but you want to be able to tick them off or go, look, I'm 75%, 80% towards achieving my ideal scene. Number two, when you write each point, write it in the past tense like it's actually happened. So it's important to write it in the past tense so it's actually happened. So don't say you want to achieve something. You might say, for example, instead of saying I want to have this time available to be able to exercise 3 times a week and maintain a good level of fitness, you would say I'm able to exercise 3 times a week and have maintained and have a high level of fitness and vitality. So it's very important because you're programming your brain in a way that makes it believe it's happened. And that's a key part of when you're looking at visioning processes. So write it in a way that it's already happened in past tense. So they also need to be written so that you can actually have 100% certainty that you've achieved it. So statements like, I want to have a happy marriage, I want to have an impact on the planet. These are great statements, but they're very, I would consider them very fluffy, that you can't actually there might be something you might move towards, but you want to be able to know, you want to be able to tick it off and say, look, I'm most of the way there. So try to be as specific as possible with these statements, because you want to be able to, the fourth part of this process is to tick them off. You want to know that you're moving from your current scene to your ideal scene, because you should be able to tick these things off one by one by one, and it keeps your attention on making sure that when you evolve your personal life and your business life, that you are moving towards your ideal scene. Keeping in mind that that's one of the key motivators and reasons for doing this process. And so one of the things you could do is, if you've mapped out your ideal scene, you want to look at a day in the future. Could be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever. And what would that look like? Where would you be? Who would you be spending time with? What would you be doing? These are ways of actually taking you into that future and visioning, and actually in your mind imagining like how that scene, because it is a scene, it's a visual scene. We work really well with visualization. And so trying to do that would be really good. And be specific in that scene. What would you feel? How would you be feeling? Who would you be spending time with? Are you in the warm climates, in cold climates? Are you spending time doing things? What sort of things you would love to be doing and spending time on? So try to sort of think it through along those lines. So for example, and I'll give you an example, and I've sort of done that. So you could have an ideal scene item which could say, I have enough time to exercise regularly. I think this is too vague and it can't really be measured, because enough time, how much is enough time, and what does exercise regularly mean? So the way you would reframe that is to say, I'm able to exercise at least 3 mornings a week for at least 1 hour, and enabling me to maintain a high level of fitness and vitality. So that's a very clear statement, which gives you you can actually sit at that and go, yep, I'm very fit and healthy. I am doing 3 times a week for at least an hour. So you can see the difference. The more specific you can be, the more powerful and the more valuable this process will be. So what I want to do now is just share with you an example of, and remember that there's 2 steps to this process. You start with your personal ideal scene process. And once you've mapped that out, then you can work on your business ideal scene process. So what I want to do with you is share some examples of this to give you some more, so that you can see it, you can understand it, you can better get a picture around it. So let me do that now, and I'll walk you through that as a bit of a process so you can understand what that looks like. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to start with my personal ideal scene, give you an example of that, and then from there be able to give you an example of one of my business's ideal scene. So this is my ideal scene. This is something it doesn't change very much now. It's quite stable. I've been doing this process for over a decade now. And what it does is it enables me to make sure that whatever I spend my time on, what I do in business or what other areas of life I'm sort of developing, that they are able to move me closer towards and make sure I maintain my ideal scene. And you can read what they are here. They're example of things that are important, how I spend my time. So doing what I love to do every day and able to check out if I want to, when I want to. So that to me is all about time, the flexibility and complete control over my time. My marriage is important. I've been married for 36 years. So I have a happy and fulfilling and long marriage to my beautiful wife, Robin. Able to assist and help her on her chosen path and direction. One of the most important things for me is with time is spending it with the most important people in my life. I mean, that's what drives us, but yet we get trapped into the business cycle or other things, and we might not spend as much time. So I'm able to spend quality time with the most important people in my life when they need me or I want to. And that also applies with my kids, helping them on their path. They're not kids anymore, they're all adults, but help be there when needed. I'm not involved in day-to-day business activity or processes. I found that I've done that for many, many years, but it reduces my flexibility and the ability to be spontaneous. So I'm not involved in that. That's something that's important to me. Money flow and requirements are handled. I don't really need to think about money. It's just something that comes as an outcome, and it's a great place to be where you don't really have to think about money flows. It's sort of handled. Got a great, beautiful, inspirational, functional home base. I really love meeting new clients, expanding business. So I'm always involved in new business, expanding businesses, whether they're my own businesses or those of my clients. And the other thing is I have a high level of fitness and health, energy and vitality, and that enables me to do what I want to do. So that gives you an example of my ideal scene, and I can always check back to this. So before I embark on a project or I'm involved in something new, is it going to take me closer to my ideal scene, or is it actually going to take me away from my ideal scene? So this is my personal ideal scene, and you can see some of the points that I mentioned before, how they're structured so that they can work for you. So now I'm going to take you to one of my businesses, ResiCert, is a property inspection business. And I want to give you an example down here how important this has been. I started the business in 2009 and I wrote this in 2011. You can sort of see it down here. And what it looked like in 2011 is a bit like this. When you think about it, 2011, it was myself and one other, it's a franchise business, one other franchisee. But I wrote this scene up so that it was not only compatible with my personal ideal scene, but it also became a very clear framework and a guidance for exactly how I wanted to build this business. And you can see how, and this is, people would look at this is over a decade ago and go, it's crazy when it was such a small business. But I was very clear about what it needed to look like, what the scene needed to look like. And you can read some of these points. I wanted a paper-free business. I wanted to be Australia's largest and most well-known. We are a paper-free business, and you can see I've written it in the past tense that has systems which enable things to be dealt with instantly and fast. We're always looking for better ways to leverage technology to make things faster, to reduce time needed and improve the lifestyle aspect of our team. We're recognised as a premium brand that enables us to generate a higher revenue per inspector than any other. So you can sort of see I've written these points out. This was in 2011. So very clear, I've documented, I think there's about 25, 26, 27 points. And so anything that was going to happen in the business, I can come back and say, is that going to move me closer to my ideal scene or take me away from it, if that makes sense? So fast forward today, this is the current version that we have. It hasn't changed much. So when you look at the ideal scene today, it hasn't changed that much. And I can actually move through these points now and tick almost all of these items off. So this hasn't been by accident. All of these items on here have been achieved, and I have what I would consider with ResiCert my ideal business or my ideal scene for that business. And it's because of this high clarity, which has been in place for over a decade, which has enabled me not to wander off and, in essence, build a business that would be someone else's business model instead of my own. So there'll be information I can share with you, more details relating to the ideal scene, but it's quite amazing to look at this process that's over a decade old, and to be able to look at this, it's really enabled me to stay focused, be very clear about how the business needed to be built out, what it needed to look like, and what was important for that to happen. So hopefully that makes sense. The process of, what I really wanted to achieve in this episode was really motivate you to engage in a process of creating your own personal scene, which then can feed your ideal scene. This business ideal scene fully supports my personal scene. So hopefully that makes sense, and it's been a useful process. We've got a lot of resources available that we can share with you, more detail around how to go about this process. But I would really encourage you, in order to build your ideal business, you really need to map out both your personal ideal scene first and foremost, and once you've done that, then you can build out your business ideal scene, and then that's the start point and creates a bit of a baseline framework for what that should look like. And if you haven't started your business yet, you can use this as a process to do that. If you are in business, look at your current business, and it'll give you the guidance and the framework for how to create and move towards your ideal business model. Okay, until next time, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this session.